Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar called Readying Your Airport for the Changed World. This webinar is sponsored by RS&H, one of our prime partners. I'm Stephanie Gupta, Senior Vice President for Security and Facilitation at AAAE, and the moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, let's cover a few logistical details. Please note, all attendees are muted. If you have a question for one of our presenters, please type the question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Your question will be put in the queue and only visible to AAAE. Q&A will take place at the end of the webinar. We'll try to cover as many questions as possible, so I encourage you to participate. Also, if you're having a technical issue, please contact AAAE Meetings. The email is AAAEmeetings@AAAE.org or use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So let's start the webinar. Less than 2 months ago, over 2 million people traveled through our airports each day. Hundreds of thousands of aviation-related employees also worked in these facilities. During this period, passengers, airport, and airline employees may have been exposed to germs shed by others that harbored infectious diseases. To minimize exposure, all but essential travel and work at airports has stopped. Now, as we get ready to reopen the U.S. economy, how will domestic and international travel system come back? Will it start with the business travelers, or will it start up with a pent-up demand by leisure travelers who want to get out of the house and go somewhere inexpensively? What safety measures will these passengers expect in our airport facilities, and will those be enough to rebuild consumer confidence in air travel and our airports going forward? Our panel today will discuss how airports of different sizes and in different parts of the country are preparing to resume operations. Also, we'll hear recommendations from airport designers and healthcare specialists about what could be deployed to our aviation facilities. And we'll hear from a hospital administrator about what they do to maintain a secure and clean environment for patients and guests alike. It is my hope that during this conversation, you'll get some ideas on a path that will create a healthier and safer airport environment, both for passengers and employees in this new normal. Now, let me introduce the panelists for this afternoon's webinar. Panelists, please give a wave as I mention your name. The first one is Roddy Bogus, who's the Vice President and Aviation Building Service Group Leader at RS&H. Then we have Kevin Buman, the Director of Airports for the County of San Luis Obispo in California. Aaron Burris is a Senior Interior Designer for Healthcare at RS&H. Scott Crawford is a Clean Room Consultant at RS&H. Kyle Dorsey is the Vice President of Operations at Jacksonville Baptist Medical Center. Kelly Johnson is the Airport Director for the Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport Authority. Michael Langeth is the President and CEO at the Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority. And Ivar Satiro is the Airport Director at San Francisco International Airport. Thank you all for participating. Let's get started with a question for everybody on the panel, which is, how do we set up airports, our airport facilities, so that people, both passengers and employees, feel safe again, and that we don't have to dramatically curtail operations if a second COVID-19 wave or another type of infectious disease occurs? What should our practices look like in the future? Throw that out to whoever wants to tackle it first. Maybe Ivar from a big airport perspective?
Sure, and we've all just responded, I think, so quickly as airports and wanting to always have that assurance for our passengers that our facilities are safe and well taken care of. And, I think pretty immediately we all went into kind of a best practices approach of high touch point cleaning and disinfecting and all of those, kind of quick efforts around social distancing and things. And then a more thoughtful approach around all of the protections of helping them understand the 6-foot separations and where it's important. And I think, the messaging has been really important to the public to try to have some reassurance, but it has to work as a system as well. And so I think airports really came together, I feel like, once the crisis occurred. And I think AAAE and ACI and U.S. travel, as an industry, we came together and started to have these conversations. And so I think the reaction and the sharing of best practices really helped move us in a positive direction, almost out of the gate, as we saw what this was really evolving into.
Great. Michael, you want to add on to that?
Sure, I'll jump in there. We're 30 days into this or so, and I'm not sure I'm going to be a health expert at this point, but I have had a little bit of time to kind of think about, is this going to be kind of our new normal? If you think about after 9/11, the federal government set up a brand new agency, Transportation Security Administration, with new security protocols they put into place. I'm wondering if we're at a very similar point in time regarding these viruses that are traveling across the world. I know we had SARS, we had H1N1, we kind of rebounded from those things. It didn't really shut our entire system down, but this is going to be the new normal. Do we have to wind up potentially going through a new process of how we're going to process customers through and really look at it from a health standpoint? So as we started to look at our facilities, we're contemplating, do you have to do things like thermal imaging in terms of temperatures for people coming through your facility? Do you have to do the same thing from the international concourse with people coming inbound, even maybe domestically? I will tell you that we've done some work with Duke University. Duke University has got a couple of researchers. They're looking at the spread of influenza, whether or not it's the coronavirus or the general flu. They actually did some monitoring in our facilities. And so could we have these sensors that are in our facilities, and as people walk by them, you create what they call a vapor wake, just like a wake from a boat. This vapor wake is what you'll detect these different types of viruses that are out there. So are we really looking at not just short-term solutions that we've all put into place, which is all the high touch point cleaning that needs to be done, people wearing masks, people wearing gloves? Is this more of a longer term solution we need to be looking at? So the next time the next superboat comes up, 2 or 3 years down the line, we don't have to shut the entire system down because we're already conducting some sort of medical monitoring. And for us, maybe it's as simple as thermal imaging cameras before you enter to our facilities. We have kind of what I call a sterile environment that people would enter into as they walk through this thermal imaging. If they wind up triggering something, they get additional medical screening before they're allowed in the facility. Do they also get screened before they go through TSA? Do we screen people when they actually leave the checkpoints itself to kind of monitor them? So our public health officials know if anything domestic or international is coming through our facilities. Because if you look at coronavirus, I mean, the conduit of spreading that was aircraft all over the world. So maybe longer term, we need to be thinking about medical monitoring. It may not necessarily be a short-term solution, but maybe we need to come up with longer-term solutions of how we're going to monitor these things, both domestically and internationally as they're coming through our facilities. So those are the things that we're starting to contemplate and evaluate. I don't know if we've made any decisions, but those are things we're wondering right now.
That's really interesting. Well, I was going to say the vapor wake idea, that's what TSA uses with their dogs. And I think I cut somebody off, so please jump in with whoever I just accidentally cut off.
Well, I don't know if it was me, Stephanie, but we've been hearing a lot from our clients and from industry, kind of following along with what Michael had to say is, there's a near-term piece, which is how do we make our passengers feel more comfortable about coming into a facility that, up until St. Patrick's Day was a very crowded facility and a lot of people around. So what do we do to get people in the door and feel comfortable? And sometimes that may just be seeing people cleaning, because if the cleaning crew left right before they walked in the terminal, they may not know that it's been very thoroughly and professionally cleaned. So sometimes that perception piece is a key element as well. I think some of the larger issues that we could see resolved as part of this, we've had technology for quite some time that can help eliminate queuing, potentially queuing before the security checkpoint. We've seen various different ways of boarding aircraft that may not require quite so much close queuing or gate hugging, more contactless type of or touchless type of technologies being deployed that probably existed, but we've never fully adopted. I think it'll be interesting to see, and maybe borne out by maybe what we can learn here today from the medical folks on the panel as to, how long is this a new normal for us, or is this just a blip on the radar?
Now, a lot of the things you mentioned, we will be talking about in more detail now. Kelly, I think I saw you light up.
Yep, to Roddy's point, that's something that we've been working toward is we're in the process of formulating a committee of some airport staff as well as our tenants, and we're looking at what we can do to make our passengers feel comfortable. Certainly, we did all the things that other places have done, closing entrances, taking temperatures. We started a process where we actually fogged the building every night with a solution that killed viruses and germs. We actually had a video taken of that and posted it on Facebook and Instagram and tweeted it so we could sort of let our passengers know we're out here, we're doing these things for you, but when they come back, what are we going to do to make them feel more comfortable, make them feel safer, make them feel valued? And we're knocking around ideas like, as you come in, picking up free hand sanitizer, a small package of wipes that you can take on the airplane and sanitize your tray table and your seat. All kinds of different protocols, including shields that actually are on order now for all of our ticket counters, all of the gate counters, for all of our tenants. Looking at what we can do for our TSA partners to make sure that they're safe and shielding and those types of things. So it's not just what we've done, it's what we're going to do to make passengers feel like they're safe when they come out here and safe going through the process. So a lot of folks are working on that, at least on our side, and we're watching our friends up the road at Walmart to see what they're doing to make sure that they're making their customers feel safe. They handle logistics on a very much larger scale than we do, so we're garnering ideas from everybody, and hopefully we'll pick up some good ones today.
So Stephanie, in regard to the confidence of the traveler, I think as an airport, we play a role in that, and airports across the country are all doing their own things right now, I think, of which there is a common level of best practice and alignment. But how we clean our buildings and even our airplanes has largely been an unregulated activity in this industry. And you go back in time in aviation, and there was a lot of safety and security elements that were unregulated. So as we look forward in this, I think one of the open questions is how much of the things we are doing today will remain as best practices, and how many will become required under some level of state or federal regulation in how we ensure the hygiene within our buildings and even on board the aircraft. I think we're all in this do mode right now of ensuring this level of cleanliness. But as the pandemic moves behind us and life returns, how much of this will remain, either because we intend to keep it there or because we're required to, and the customer confidence related to that. I think that's a really important thing for us to consider is imagine 6 months or 2 years from now, and what are we still doing and why?
Kevin, that's a really good point. I'm going to ask the healthcare providers about that in just a second, but Michael, I think you wanted to jump on.
I'm good.
Okay. So yeah, what I've heard from the airport so far, and Roddy, is that everyone's cleaning more. You're doing different things. You're fogging. You've got ideas about how to make the traveling public feel safer with the wipes, those types. But Kyle, hospitals deal with sick people and people visiting sick people all the time. What do you do with like the enhanced cleaning protocols that you would suggest airports consider doing? And what type of auditing do you take on to make sure that the recommendations for cleaning, disinfectant are actually being met? Give us some ideas there.
Great question, Stephanie. And I think a lot of what the hospitals the airports are doing are right in line with what we're doing within the hospitals. We're spending extra time in those high touch areas and elevator cabs, rounding and wiping down these surfaces more frequently than we used to. Some of our outreach and outpatient areas are closed right now due to the virus, and we've reallocated those team members to really help us clean some of those high touch areas within the more acute care environments. Another technology that we have deployed within the hospital is UV services that help us clean and disinfect. We use a robot-like service. It looks a little bit like an R2-D2 that emits pulse xenon UV light. The pulse xenon light doesn't clean the surface. It's kind of like using Purell on your hands. It sanitizes the surface, but it still can be grossly dirty. There's a difference between clean and sanitized, I guess is the first thing that I would highlight. How it works is it virtually inoculates the virus. It also works on bacteria and other carcinogens to break them down so virtually they can't live any longer. We initially introduced this technology during the whole Ebola scare in 2014, 2016 to help us be prepared. Fortunately, we never needed to use it for that outbreak, but it's come in very handy with the COVID-19 pandemic. We use it specifically in our rooms where we've had COVID-19 patients. We put it in the room after a patient is discharged and run 3 different cycles. And the reason why I highlight the 3 different cycles of the robot, they're 5-minute cycles. The robot can only inoculate what the light touches. If the light can't see it, it doesn't have an impact on the surface. So I share that because in airports, it'd be hard in some of the large open areas, but in areas where you have condensed seating and other areas, this may be a technology you can use. The other limitation is you can't use it in a space that's occupied by people. The light itself won't hurt you. It's more that you just don't want to look at it directly. It's mainly to just protect the eyesight. And on the robot itself, it has little sensors that'll turn itself off. So what we do is we use it in the room immediately after discharge to make it safe for our team to go in there and clean the room. Then we disinfect the room with both a bleach and a quaternary cleaner, and then we use it again at the end of the cycle to get anything that may have been left after the discharge cleaning. We've used the same technology to clean our personal protective equipment or PPE. This is how we're reprocessing and recycling our N95 masks that are in short supply. So that's just an idea that could potentially be adopted by the airports.
That's great. In fact, we had a couple of questions pop up while you were talking about UV disinfecting, about using UV in the air handling systems. And I know that was another point that a lot of people have expressed some interest about. So maybe Rodney or Scott or Aaron or Kyle, if you guys could talk a little bit more about the air handling systems and perhaps changes that either need to be made or if we should put UV lights in those at airports.
So,
sure. I think, oh, sorry, Roddy. I think, the thing to keep in mind with UV is essentially its time or its time to exposure. If you heard Kyle, he mentioned that he runs a cycle for 5 minutes. So as air is rushing through a duct system or an air handler, it doesn't get that sustained time under the UV light. We have found UV lights in the ductwork or in the air handlers more effective upstream of the coils in order to keep the coils clean so that you're not harboring or growing any growth on your coils that then you're pushing into your facility. And in terms of what can be done on the air handling side, a lot of systems utilize fresh air and dump fresh air into a facility. There is the ability internal to the facility to potentially recirculate some of that air, or scrub it, if you will, through an additional fan set or an additional set of filters in order to pull any bacteria out of the air through a higher MERV rating filter or a HEPA filter. And then dump that clean air back into the space as well, so that you're getting more air changes in the space and entering more fresh air into your spaces more frequently, which doesn't allow those types of particulates to linger in the air so much.
Right.
Stephanie, one of the things, and of course I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I'll give you a little bit of how deep I can go here. We're pushing a lot of air through our terminals and our concourses in the U.S. today, and trying to keep buildings that have a lot of openings to the outside under a positive pressure requires quite a bit of air going through it. So there's a couple of things I think, as Scott talked about earlier, whether you're doing ionization in the ducts. I think before the coils is the best place to do it because you get a lot of growth on the coils as we're pulling air back through. Whether you're looking at UV lighting or or plasma or any other number of methods, we would say it might be best pre-coil. But I think the other thing to look through is the amount of fresh air intake that we're bringing in as well. Typically these days, we measure on our return air a lot of the air coming back from the terminals. It's measured more on an occupancy of people in the space and CO2, and that triggers a lot of times how much fresh air intake is put back in. It may be time that we take a look at some standards that don't just take a look at the occupancy of the space or the amount of people in the space to determine how much fresh air we put in, so that we're not recirculating as much bad air while we're cleaning it.
So Rodney, if you're re-looking at the space, does that require terminal changes or new guidelines as it relates to air handling or that type?
Well, there's obviously lots of guidelines on what the requirement is, and a lot of them are code specific and recommendations. I think the various code agencies, it may be something along with our new normal of how much healthcare plays into looking at these things. It may come out with new standards. Certainly, building codes and the requirements are the minimal standards that you have to meet. They don't keep you from doing more. So I think it's a work in progress for all of us. I think depending on how far we go with this and how systemic this concern is in airports, will determine what type of products end up being on the market that we can use. For instance, there's a lot of lighting that we use in hospital and medical facilities that also has a germicidal or radiation type of effect, but that we don't use them typically in public assembly buildings. But is that something, especially at night where we have nighttime lights or in between flights in a hold room, that we turn these on that also help irradiate the invisible viruses we're trying to do so. So I think there's going to be a lot of product that comes from the medical side that we may start seeing on public assembly spaces, which would be very much what we look at in airports.
Okay. One of the other things that Kelly mentioned was fogging. You're defogging your airport facilities, Kelly. Did I understand you correctly?
That's right. We started pretty early on. We make sure everybody's out of the building, and we have a company that comes in. We provide escorts, and we spray the whole place down, handrails, chairs, touch points, everything. It's quite expensive. We've actually ordered the units ourselves. They won't be in until August or September because there's, of course, a run on that equipment. So we'll be bringing that in-house, and it's something that we're going to carry forward as we move past this. It's something that I think the public has embraced. Like I said, we did some social media about it. It makes the people that work in the building feel better. It's not just about the customer. It's about our tenants, and it's about our own teams. So we found it's been successful. It doesn't seem to like wood surfaces real well, so we're looking at possibly changing that chemical. But it's a lot of the mixture is actually made up of peroxide and water, so doesn't do much. Have to wait about 10 minutes for it to dry, and it seems to be working fairly well.
Great. Any other airports using that?
We're not using that yet. We've got those on back order, and that's been part of the problem, is trying to get the supplies in. The packs and the equipment has been our biggest challenge in that space.
Okay.
We're using it as just a part of a triage. If we know there's a person that tests positive for the virus, we will go through and use that fogging technology and all of the touch points that we can trace back to their paths of travel.
Great. Thanks.
Stephanie, I guess the only thing I would add is, while a good portion of this conversation may be on the public side of the operation, probably everything we talk about has a play on the employee side, because these employees come up and interact with the passengers as well, and just kind of like an employee having a bad day can rub off on a passenger. I think everything we talk about has a place in the back office space as well.
Certainly. Let's talk about a couple other places in the airports that are germy. And Kyle, jump in here with hospital examples, because you have germs all over the place too. You know, one of the other ones that I always think about when I'm traveling through the airport is the escalators. You know, how many people have touched them? How many people touch those handrails all the time? Is there a way to make them more sanitary or, you know, disinfect them other than somebody coming by and wiping them with some type of spray?
Stephanie, there's actually a device that was created a few years ago. I believe it was by LG, and I think a couple other manufacturers have come out with something more similar, but it actually attaches to the end of the escalator railing. And as the railing rotates, there's a UV light within this contraption within a box. And it's really no much larger than perhaps a foaming, sanitizer box that does attach to the end of it. And that's something that I obviously wasn't aware of until recently. And I think that one of the interesting bits about where we are right now, and clearly these very unprecedented times, is that every industry is looking to provide solutions to whatever market they serve. So, whether it's a sanitary component manufacturer or a carpet industry, everyone's trying to develop products and solutions that are going to be better used in this type of critical time. And so I look forward to, daily things coming out like this that can really help the larger industry as a whole.
Well, Erin, you mentioned carpet, and that was another place I was going to go to. Airports have carpet. Those hold germs. Do we?
They do. That's been a big question for a long time. I think it really depends on what it is that's installed. There are some areas or some manufacturers that provide an antimicrobial material or a type of solution that can be applied to the carpet. However, that comes back to more of a holistic approach. What is your cleaning, operation look like? Who is actually cleaning these facilities? So it really becomes more of a collaborative effort of everyone that's involved on the facilities side. Clearly in hospitals, the only area that we would consider using carpet occasionally is in a waiting room, perhaps, and that's to bring about a more, home-like feel. And airports being the larger, expansive space, we really need to consider acoustics. And thankfully, there's a lot of great products on the market that address that concern, whether it be a higher-end, thicker LVT or a rubber, or maybe it's just breaking it up instead of having all of the hold areas in carpet. Maybe there's certain areas that can be addressed to create seating environments that, I think was one of the questions as well. How do we separate folks? And maybe there's areas where we can do that specifically with carpet, but then the general space is more of a hard material. Some of the ceramics and porcelain tiles that are installed now react to the sunlight. So if there's natural sunlight, that immediately starts to evaporate any type of bacteria or, negative particulate that lands on that surface. So there are specific products for that as well that can certainly be addressed.
Right. Well, we're going to.
Stephanie, I've got a question for Erin. So see these little devices right here? They're 10 times worse than the toilet. So I guess the question is, are there going to be commercially available devices that potentially could charge cell phones plus kind of what I call decontaminate? Or is there products out there like that for airports to purchase to try to clean these things up?
Not that I've personally seen. If I knew I would install one or put them all over every project that I have, I think that in general, the public has become a bit more aware of their own practices. I think right now specifically, it's the joke is hand washing this week, turn signals next week would be the lesson. So, how does everyone keep their own personal device clean? But that's something that everyone needs to take responsibility for that. I don't know if Scott's aware of perhaps an apparatus that can be installed there. He's shaking his head yes.
I am. They actually, to answer the question directly, they actually do make charging banks that are that will hold a cell phone and douse it in UV light. So that may be something if there are charging stations or charging stands that could be implemented. And then the second thing too that I think is just raising awareness to everyone. I know we mentioned early on in the call about providing potential you know, wipes, you know, as folks enter ticketing or enter the terminal and whatnot. You know, I think we're going to see a lot more of the typical passenger be more prepared. I know myself, I mentioned earlier that while we were preparing for this, was that I travel to the grocery store and anywhere I go with my own set of wipes. So just in case there are none there, or I don't trust somebody else's wipes, I have my own and I know what I brought. So I think we're going to find people doing that a lot more and bringing their own sort of cleaning products, wipes, hand sanitizer, sprays or whatnot, as they travel, and also be more aware that yes, you know, my cell phone is dirtier than sort of anything that I own, or the hotel remote's the dirtiest thing in the hotel. You know, I mean, I think we're gonna be hyper vigilant for a while, you know, in some aspects, but.
Well, I think another place that we're seeing people already being hyper vigilant is at the TSA security checkpoints. I mean, they're doing a really good job of cleaning the bins that everyone has to touch, but I don't think they clean them every time. So does anyone have any insights on what we could do to perhaps make the bins a little bit cleaner, or how often things should be cleaned?
I'm going to say, you know, that there's going to be a lot of people that won't want to touch a bin unless it has been cleaned. So I don't think at the end of the day, twice a day, 3 times a day is going to be enough for a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff that runs through those bins, you know, people's shoes, you know, personal effects. I think the TSA is going to have to come up with a way to sanitize through spray and wipes, or, you know, or an automated system for the automated ones that will sanitize those, and that will obviously slow down the lines if there's not enough bins. But the backside of that is if people like Scott just brought about to bring their own wipes and are going to want to sanitize their own tray before they put it in, that's really going to slow down the checkpoints, and that may not be a big issue today and tomorrow, but it will come to be that way. And that and the trays that you get your ticket on at the restaurants are some of the dirtiest things, other than cell phones, perhaps in the terminals, and we're going to have to see those things sanitized more frequently, a lot more frequently, I think.
What
And
about
to add on to that regarding TSA checkpoint, we've asked TSA, if you were to put in this 6-foot social distancing, what kind of throughput reduction would you see through your checkpoint? And what they've communicated back to us is you'd see about a 50% reduction in your throughput capacity through your facility.
So Michael, when you're talking about the 6-foot social distancing, are you talking about the dots on the ground that certain airports are doing, or airlines are doing, or are you talking more about a more permanent structure? I've seen plexiglass or some type of barriers, stanchions.
Yeah, I think the initial analysis was simply that 6-foot separation. I'm not sure that they've looked at those plexiglass dividers. I've seen a couple of those that allow you to compress that a little bit. But if you just think about the entire facility, if we had to implement a 6-foot spacing on everything you do, from getting to check-in, from kiosk usage to dropping your bag to the TSA checkpoint, boy, your facility becomes very small very quickly. As you work your way through that process, you really reduce the throughput capacity of the facility.
Yeah, if you and the airport could talk a little bit more about that, I think that would be very interesting to a number of people that are listening to the webinar. You know, what airport infrastructure changes are going to need to be made to accommodate social distancing in the queue areas, the TSA security checkpoint, the custom lines, the Starbucks lines, the lines for going into the bathroom right after everyone gets off a flight. You know, how are you envisioning if we have to do 6 feet for a good period of time? How does this work?
Yeah, so I think at least for us, as we've started to look at it, I think the expectation from the customer is exactly what they see at the grocery store or the bank or any other place that they're going to right now, where they're seeing this 6-foot separation. I think they're going to anticipate that as they come back into our facilities. I think it's extremely challenging. You know, maybe one silver lining as a result of significant downturn in overall passengers is I'm not anticipating by May 1 that we're going to have 100% of our customers coming back to our facilities. I think this is a very slow ramp up. I think the CEO for Delta talked about a 3-year time frame to get back to what the new normal is. And so I think we'll have some time. So as you start putting these social distancing measures in, it may not seem that bad because we'll have the space. And hopefully by the time we reach the point we're reaching 40 and 50% return to service in terms of those customers, they have a vaccine or a pill in place that allows us to start softening those things up just a little bit. I think there will be some new technology in terms of some screen dividers. You know, you got the serpentine lines that are there. Imagine you can't serpentine anymore because people can't be 6 feet apart. Well, there's some different types of physical barriers you can actually put up there, some plexiglass barriers. Potentially could allow those things to be a little bit closer and still have the spacing. So I think we're all learning on the fly. And I think it's going to be very challenging because as customers come back, while we talk about all this cleaning, the customer's going to want to know when they come through the front door, what is different? I've got to see something different when I come in that facility in order for me to feel safe when I come in there. So I think it's going to have to be the social distancing piece is going to be the point, is going to be the piece, because people are familiar with, okay, everybody's cleaning more, everybody's got hand sanitizers are out there, everybody's got wipes out there, but what else are you doing? What else is different at the end of the day? And from a mask standpoint, are we going to require masks and the social distancing? I think that's what we'll start with, but I think it'll evolve over time. One of the things I think we're starting to contemplate just organizationally is, you know, if you think about this 20 years ago, did you have an environmental specialist on your staff? Probably not. So today, do I need to hire a public health consultant? Or do I need to hire somebody that's a public health specialist that's going to be on my staff to help me navigate my way through this process to try to figure out what this new normal is? Because I think we're going to continue to experience these things and we're going to have to make more permanent adjustments. Short term, you got to make the customer feel comfortable. What does that future look like is really in question to me about some major investments are going to have to be made at airports from some sort of health monitoring standpoint.
I'll definitely get back to the health monitoring side and the masks, but do any other airports want to jump in with the social distancing and the impact on your operations, your infrastructure?
I think one of the inherent paradoxes we face here is that without a major modification to aircraft interiors or an ability of the airlines to operate at significantly reduced loads, that, you know, we can talk about 6 foot separation in a terminal, but when folks get on the aircraft and whether it's the person in the row behind you or 2 seats away, that 6 foot distance is going to be difficult to impossible to maintain on the aircraft with any economic viability for the airlines. And so, you know, going back to my previous comment about the system, the aviation system, the airlines, the airports, ground transportation, everything is going to have a role to play in elevating this consumer confidence. But there's going to have to be some alignment, I think, in expectations that no, we don't have 6 foot separation in the airport because you're about to get on the airplane. Or maybe we do because you're going to get on the airplane and it's closer. I don't know where that ultimately settles, but I think the system we have today and all of the assumptions that go into designing an aviation facility for, you know, number of people per square foot for a given type of use or the length of a queue line for a given function, none of that ever contemplated this issue of spacing. And if that's the way the industry goes, it's going to be decades to reinvent all of our facilities to ultimately meet those standards. The practices we can put in place today could certainly play a part in this initial turnover into returning to operations. But coming back to what is sustainable, there's a lot of tough questions there, because if it becomes an expectation of the public to have this spacing, and ultimately maybe it even becomes regulated, we're going to have a lot of work to do as an industry to change things that we've never thought about changing.
I think that is the question. Is it's what's going to come about first. We all shouldn't rush and start changing our whole operations to respond to this separation. We have some time because the build back of passenger confidence in air travel is, I think our projections are going to be slow, but the rush is to find how do you get to that vaccination point and that herd immunity. And I think for now we have to do everything we can to protect the health and well-being of our passengers and our employees, and we have to monitor all of the systems in place to see what is effective and what isn't effective, and then react to it while we're in this kind of this middle ground of we're reacting to this incredibly devastating crisis to our industry but we just don't know what the near-term future looks like with it, or even the longer term, the next year. So the next year, for us, it's going to be interesting to watch all the systems we have in place and react to it, along with all the protections. And I think about the social distancing, and we talked about the TSA checkpoint, and watching the performance of our new automated screening lanes versus our traditional lanes, because in the ASLs, you've got multiple places of divestiture, which gives you the ability to space. And so maybe you don't lose 50% of your capacity, but what is that penalty you take? And then, managing through those systems and looking at those tweaks to keep that throughput. And it's this matching of the ability to move people through our facility with the speed at which we need to see a solution to all of the needs for social distancing and protections, and the redesign of aircraft. And you're starting to see some of these new seat configurations in aircraft that are just completely, you can imagine the cost that's going to go into this kind of thing. So I think this next 6 months to a year is going to be incredibly informative about how we prepare for the future and become more resilient as we have to deal with these kinds of crises.
From a healthcare perspective, there isn't a cure or a vaccine probably going to be in the next 9 months. I think the ideal would be that there's a vaccine available for the next flu season. And that would still be considered rapid speed for making an adjustment to a flu vaccine. The only other time we've really been successful of doing that is when we've came out with the vaccine for Ebola, which came out in about an 8 to 9 month frame. Right now, there's a ton of research happening surrounding COVID-19, but nobody's got the silver bullet at this point. I know schools are already preparing to potentially start classless for next school year, because the likelihood of having the vaccine by the end of summer is pretty small at this point. So if social distancing isn't possible, what other ways are there to mitigate the spread of the virus? And I think that gets into a conversation around mandatory masking and other measures. But from a healthcare perspective, I would also say there's an appropriate way to wear that PPE and an inappropriate way to wear that. I'll just share my experiences in the grocery store as I see people wearing a mask and have gloves, and then they're holding their cell phone with those gloved hands. Virtually, you just nullified putting on the gloves altogether. So I do think it's going to take some education, and I see this really as an opportunity where healthcare, the CDC, airports, and others could come together to really help drive and educate the public on the best way to protect themselves when social distancing isn't a feasible possibility.
Well, Kyle, you led right into that health screening question, so I'm going to stay with you for a second. Right now, one of the real hot topics is health screening and temperature checks. Some airlines are doing it for their employees. Some airlines are talking about doing it for passengers before they board an aircraft. Certain members of Congress, one senator in your state, for example, is considering legislation to require this to, boost the confidence in air travel to get people back. So as a healthcare professional, what do you think would be some of the types of health screenings that we should be contemplating, we, the federal government, airports, airlines, et cetera? What are the good ones? What are maybe the not so reliable ones?
No, that's a great question. And I think what makes it difficult is literally those guidelines are changing every day. Just yesterday, the CDC came out with a new set of guidelines to follow for screening. I would highly recommend using the CDC as the source of truth for the questions to be asking for a screening perspective, temperature of which is only one of the 6 guidelines. I do recommend it. It's not the silver bullet. I've seen in some of the questions that are going on, why do the temperature check if they're still the asymptomatic population? It's going to take a series of questions to be able to get through everything. I will share from a healthcare perspective, I don't think you can find a hospital in the country at this point that isn't screening 100% of their visitors and team members before they enter the campus. To the point we've talked about with TSA, it does slow down the entry into the campus. We initially started by doing manual temperatures with RF thermometers, because you don't want touch thermometers, because then you've got to clean them between every person that's entering. Similar to an airport, our shift changes happen on the 7s in healthcare. So in my facility in particular, we've got 2,500 to 3,000 people. We got to get in the facility in the matter of 30 minutes. So we've invested in a technology called FLIR, F-L-I-R. You've probably seen this. It's a way to be able to do thermal temperatures that's integrated within a camera. It's very similar to the technology that HVAC technicians use when they check your insulation. But it allows you to be able to screen a large volume of people in a very non-invasive way. For us, we're using the CDC guidelines. Anybody who's over 100 degrees, we stop and do an additional manual temperature on them. If they're still over 100 degrees, we turn them away. If it's an employee, we send them employee health. And at that point, they either have to have COVID-19 testing done or they have to wait 14 days and be asymptomatic. I think that's probably more of a challenge for an airport in that are you able to turn somebody away from something that they've purchased? I think that creates an interesting dynamic and probably a unique conversation.
Oh, yes, it does.
Stephanie, can I ask Kyle a question?
Of course.
So Kyle, for the airport industry, do you see this coronavirus, is this kind of a one and done, in 18 months we're going to be out of this, we're going to return to a normal lifestyle, crowded facilities, explosive growth for us, or is another superbug of some sort going to come up? Is there any advice you could provide airports in terms of, from a health monitoring standpoint, would you encourage us to do something to prepare for the future? What advice can you give us?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see this as a one and done. I think as we continue to introduce more people back into society, you're going to continue to see blips of COVID-19. From an epidemiological perspective, we've actually been very fortunate that we haven't had exposure to any other major superbugs. Or we did have the exposure and it just didn't have the mortality that the COVID-19 is having. Honest, I do think doing screenings like temperature screenings as a routine practice makes sense. As I referenced with the FLIR technology, it's not an inexpensive technology. Each one of those cameras cost about $30,000, but we see this as just becoming our standard practice for screening people into our emergency departments. So we can better protect our team members and other patients that are sitting there. And this way we can isolate the people who have the temperature from those who don't. So this way we're not creating a spread inadvertently within our own facility. I think as we continue to learn from COVID-19, we're going to learn about more and more screenings that we can adopt into our practices. I think the big pushback is going to be how do we do that without slowing down our operation or limiting access? We haven't figured that out. I think from a hospital perspective, you're going to continue to see us do a limited visitation policy pretty much here into the future until there is a vaccine, which has totally changed our business going forward. So I hope I answered your question, Beth.
You did. We have a similar technology on our fire trucks. So maybe we'll put our fire trucks out there and people walk by. If they're hot, we'll just light them up with water. They'll be decontaminated. They can walk right in the facility.
Yeah, some of the trick with the cameras has been not drawing attention to people because then it creates a sense of, did I get exposed to the person who was in front of me in line? We're trying to keep that anxiety and that anxiousness down as much as possible. Plus, we also want to protect the confidentiality of that individual who may have come in a little hot.
Well, those are some really good questions. So let's explore that a little bit more from the airport perspective. First question is, should airports be taking temperatures of travelers and your employees? Or should that be, in your opinion, something that CDC or the federal government mandates or tells us to do? Anyone want to jump on that one?
Well, as a non-hub domestic airport, we're not eagerly looking for more mandates or requirements, particularly if they're unfunded or require space. And I probably speak for airports of all size, in fact. But you know, I think, and it'd be interesting to hear Ivar's comments on this about, you know, international versus domestic, and you know, where do we draw the line on where that is appropriate? Either in as it relates to a known outbreak of some sort, or just as a matter of standard operating procedure. It would seem like, as you know, as a concept, if that were to become a new thing we're going to be doing at you know, any airport in the country, for whether it's a domestic or international flight, somehow it's incorporated into the security screening process. and whether it uses something like the technology Kyle's talking about or some other measures, but to try and put it in line with an existing process, have it as a function that is standardized across the system. Talking with some colleagues in Florida when there was efforts going on down there to do screening at various airports related to travel from the Northeast, that was a challenge for them. And I think, a lot of these things that we try and stand up quickly while well-intentioned are fraught with issues, both in the near term and especially the long term. So we will be looking at what others are doing before we endeavor to do anything like that. Certainly as a measure we would adopt ourselves, and of course if it's required we'll look at best practices, but that will be a very challenging function to bring into an airport.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. Ivar, before we get to you, just one follow-up question to that. If you put a temperature check or a health screening in the TSA security line, is that too late in the process? Kyle was talking about doing it at the door. So if you get to the TSA checkpoint, people have checked their bags, they've checked in for their flights, they've done, they're expecting to travel at that point.
I think you need to do it before they enter the facility. It's almost like you have a sterile facility. You've cleaned the facility down, and so before people enter that facility. And I think the debate whether or not, do airports take these things on? Well, so here's the alternative. The alternative is if we don't try to get engaged in this conversation, whether or not it's mandated by the federal government or not, we're going to run into the same situation we're at right now, which we have a total collapse of the airport industry. So if you want to wait 2 years and get another total collapse, I guess we could defer this. I'm not sure we can defer it. And I think that's what we hear from the medical professionals, is that the coronavirus is the first one. There's another one coming down the line. I don't know if it's 2 years, 20 years, 13 months. There's something else coming down the line, and we've got to do something to mitigate against this. So the next time it shows up, you don't have a complete shutdown of the air transportation system. You just can't do that twice.
And the other part I just highlight, Stephanie, is that we did restrict our entry points into the building to be able to make that happen. And I know that would be a complete disruption to the airline industry to do that. But it was the only way we could funnel people through all those cameras and be able to man them at the same time to be able to pull somebody out when their temperature is high.
Okay.
I think
things to add?
I just think about all the points of entry into our facilities. They're such massive facilities, and really we're going to have to take advantage and look for development of technology to really help control this. I agree that trying to catch it at the door, the front door, is the most effective way. And in the absence of having that, if there's a way to catch it at checkpoint, and we thought of a portal to go through and do the screenings and be able to react that way. But I think the point is it does need to be thought of as a total end-to-end travel framework. And I think airports are put in that position of having to try to bring all the stakeholders together and help enable the conversation, because we sit square in the middle of it. And the airlines, they tend to be hands off and wait until there's some kind of competitive initiative to make them react to that, or a mandate. And federal mandates, those take a lot of work and a lot of energy. And I think they react to what's being experienced at airports. And so I think for us sitting in the middle of it, we need to start helping move that framework to how we can work to end-to-end travel of protecting the health and well-being of the passengers. So I think it's not clear to me yet, how to react to it. I don't think airports should be the ones certainly to react to it, but we have the facility, we know the operation, we have to protect the operation along with all of our passengers, employees. We need to be kind of the convener of all of the folks to try to come up with those solutions.
And to Ivar's point, at what point do you turn somebody away? And then what's the reaction from the carrier involved? Have we then validated their ticket, voided their ticket? They're going to have to be our partners in this if they want us to be involved in the process and initiation of the process. The other question is the legal question. I mean, what legal right does the airport have to stop somebody from coming into a publicly owned facility and building? Certainly, I think public safety, health, and welfare plays into a big part of that answer. But right now, we don't have those answers, and those questions haven't all been asked.
So I think the city and county of San Francisco is requiring masks at the airport for everyone. How are you guys handling people that may come in without a mask?
The order, right, is for anyone, for employees. That went in a couple weeks ago, all public-facing employees, and now for the public to also have that protection when in public spaces and public facilities. Our order does not require us to be the ones to supply masks and enforce it to that extent, but we are taking that initiative of supplying masks to all arriving passengers. But we're finding, more than half come in with masks. But we're setting up to provide the masks to the passengers as they come in, and it sends the right message, I think, to people arriving that it gives them a familiarity of what to expect in San Francisco. We have the messaging when we hand out the masks as well, and saying this is what is required in these regions of the area. And it reinforces what we're doing with all of our employees and tenants as well. Is this is a crisis that we can't underreact to at this point. So I think it sets the right tone for people arriving to San Francisco as well. So the police, our law enforcement, the San Francisco Police Department, they're taking the tact of handing out notices to people that don't have masks. And so they will not write a ticket or anything, but if it becomes a persistent problem with a person and they don't go do something about it, then they'll take additional enforcement.
That's a good point, because certain air carriers like JetBlue is requiring everyone to wear a mask now. Air Canada is requiring everyone to wear a mask and fill out a health form as they check in online. And Harris County, which is where the Houston airports are located, they began mandatory face coverings on Monday, and they have a $1,000 fine for people that don't have it. So, I guess the question becomes, should everyone wear a mask, both employees and aviation workers? And who's the best group to make that determination? Would it be CDC that would make that, so we'd be consistent across the country? Kyle, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think ideal would be for the CDC to make that statement. This way we can all have a standard practice. I think ultimately you're going to see it's either going to be made by the governor's office or by the mayor's office. I can tell you here locally in Florida, there's been a big push from the healthcare coalition with the governor's office to make it mandated anytime somebody's in public. We've mandated it within our buildings. Our mayor is on board to mandating it within the city. We may have opened our beaches, but we're going to mandate you got to be out there in a mask. And then I know Governor Scott is behind that as well to expand it throughout the state. So I think that pressure may be taken off of our shoulders here in the near term. But in the interim, I think it gives that level of confidence by us setting these additional standards, because it does make you feel a little bit safer when you're in these public areas.
That's a good point. I think, Kelly, yesterday you raised a question: if people are required to wear masks, is that considered a hazardous material if people are throwing it away? Or can we just throw it away, like trash after somebody gets off the plane? Do we have disposal requirements in our airports that we weren't thinking about? So, anyone want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, we're not.
I think it would be best practice too, just so that anyone handling that trash knows what they are handling. Because it's definitely going to be an additional waste stream on the terminal that wasn't necessarily originally accounted for. So, I think it may fall into best practice to do so. Maybe not, I could be wrong, but I do know in our healthcare systems, as well as in pharmaceutical facilities and whatnot, we have soiled linens spaces and degowning spaces, and that's where we keep a lot of the used PPE for either waste or to go to a specific cleaner or what have you. So I think it might fall in line with sort of best practices rather than should you not, or should you?
So much of our frontline already comes into contact with that type of, hygienic issues and food courts and things like that. So I mean, that protection of the frontline workers is already protocols that we use for that very similar purpose. And so we would use those same protocols that we have for those frontline workers and the handling of masks as well.
Okay. Anyone? Michael, do you have something to add?
No, I don't know why my microphone keeps picking up. Sorry.
They want you to talk. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I'm just going to go to a couple right now. But as people can continue to put questions into Q&A, I think these are relevant to some of the things that we've been talking about earlier. Had some questions about ground transportation and social distancing. What should we be thinking about when traffic starts returning for the ground transportation systems, the rental car buses to the airport, the Ubers, the Lyft, the trains that go take people to their gates. What are some thoughts there on social distancing and also cleaning? I'm gonna, I think, put that out to the airports as a start.
One of the, I think, interesting things for us to watch is going to be, do people gravitate back to driving themselves to the airport? For airports maybe that have seen a significant shift to TNCs, as one less way to expose yourself in either public transit or a TNC type of service. So, could that cause a resurrection of parking in some cases? Perhaps. Probably too soon to tell, but certainly if somebody is considering their entire journey leaving from their home, that's one of the things they can completely have within their control is if I drive my own car to the airport, it's something that they are most familiar with.
I wonder from a ground transportation standpoint, the same thing is, did more of our customers wind up wanting to control their environment more, so they're going to drive to the airport? But once they get to a destination, are they going to shy away from an Uber and Lyft because those are kind of independent contractors and they don't know how well those vehicles are going to be cleaned? Do they push themselves towards rental cars where they have some sort of, I think, maybe a better assurance that these larger companies have these defined cleaning programs to kind of keep them safe? So maybe there's a change in the customer behavior, that more driving towards facilities with their own vehicles and parking, and using more rental cars because they're unsure of the cleaning practices of taxi cabs or other commercial vendors other than maybe the rental car concept maybe.
Right, and you certainly see the rental car companies, touting all of their additional cleaning standards that they are doing right now. Ivar, there was a question for you. It said, are you providing masks for outbound passengers at check-in, ticket counters, or at checkpoints?
No, just inbound passengers at this point. We do have vendors at the airport now that are starting to sell masks in their outlets.
Okay. And then
Stephanie, I want to go back to the transportation for just a minute, because I can really see Michael's point and Kevin's point about the selection could go from TNCs to rental cars, because at least you have, if you're not using your own, because you have a bit of control, and at the minimum you're not sharing it with somebody you don't know. But those with Conrax or any kind of bus transportation, I think it's akin to the questions we're asking ourselves about hold room seating. The density with which buses and trains, taking you from concourse to concourse, or rental car buses, I guess from a social distancing standpoint, we're going to have to address that by either blocking out seats and making less capacity, which means we have more buses, more rail cars deployed. We put screens up between the seats like we might do in hold rooms, but then you have a cleaning issue. And how frequently do you clean those screens, just like a sneeze guard between passengers? It's real easy to block out a seat right now and to put a cover on and say, don't sit here. There's been people say, take the handrails off so that people will self-distance and what they're comfortable in. I don't know what it's going to turn out to be, but I think that is one of the bigger questions, not only with how we handle the seating within our facility, but also I think that that same question of how we're handling it shows up on the bus and rail piece as well. And the only thing I can come up with right now, outside of a vaccine or some sort of screening that has to be clean between every pickup, is less density in the vehicles.
Or shields, which you've seen some people advertise, either the, you know, the plexiglass shields or some type of solid separation, which for airports, maybe it's a short-term solution, maybe it's a longer-term solution, but it's one of those, if you're going to put that in, there will be a cost to it.
And a maintenance cost, probably
Yeah.
even more so.
Yep. Does anyone have any thoughts about the plexiglass shields or the various barriers that are concessionaires are putting up, or some airlines are putting up, or TSA is putting up at certain travel document checker stations? Is that something
I think.
you do?
Go ahead, Joe.
We've ordered them for all of our counters, and we're also having something designed for our ticket document checker station for the TSA. TSA is working on a prototype. They told us nationwide they don't have that quite done yet, so they're allowing us to go ahead and try and work something out for them here locally, and then they're going to check that against their gifting policy to make sure it doesn't violate their gifting policy if we provide that to them.
And I was going to say, I think it goes to Michael's earlier point of from a passenger perspective. I think those are things that passengers are going to expect to see once they come into a facility. I think they're going to expect that as commonplace, to have to interact with those and through those as they move through the facility.
Okay. To remind people that are listening to the webinar that you can go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box, and I'm trying to get to them as they come up, although we have quite a few questions. While I'm starting to look through questions a little bit more, let's spend a minute or two talking about ways that we can make travel more contactless to reduce the spread of germs. You know, biometrics, maybe doing some more of that. Someone earlier had talked about the menus at restaurants. You know, are there ways that we can do tap for pay? You know, those type. Roddy, maybe you want to lead us off on some contactless ideas.
I think we've been slow to engage the technology in our hands, and while it may be one of the most dirty technologies that we touch, the ability to use the smart technologies, I think, gives us a way out of some of this stuff. We've talked earlier about the queue lines at the security checkpoint, and I'm unsure whether or not, you know, putting people on dots 6 foot apart really slow down the process, or if it's people on the composure side where things tend to clog up. But I think there are opportunities with technology we have today to use a call to checkpoint system, much the same as anything else that you use a call to system, that you get notified when it's your time to go to the checkpoint, so we can start to spread out the queues. And we talked about this a year or so ago, even in Seattle, when we were saying, you know, with these long checkpoint lines, how can we disperse them and not make them soft targets? How can we not make them soft targets for viruses as well? And maybe part of that reason is, or part of that answer is, not to have so many people in line at the time, because you have assigned checkpoint times. We go through on the secure side. Well, let's stay on the ticketing for just a second. You know, we have a lot of kiosks. The airlines have done a great job in going to kiosks, but now that's a touch device. Will we see a propensity to move away from that and really force the last remaining people away from touching anything and just taking it all on your phone or your device, for those passengers that can, one-stop bag drops? But as we get through on the air side, you know, I wonder, how does it affect our concessionaires, both food and beverage and retail? We see so many airports that now offer, you know, you can order online and just walk in and pick up and skip the line. But will we see more delivery because they can pinpoint where you are in the hold rooms or in the concourses and bring the food to you? We see far less of that from a retail perspective, and this would vastly change the way we do retail in airports. But, you know, if you're doing that and ordering something to eat and you realize you forgot your earbuds, are they going to deliver you a pair of earbuds and your food and beverage. So I think that, along with, e-gates, which we've seen some airlines try them out at various airports around the U.S., we may see more things coming that we may yet see in Europe or Asia. And I think it even drives a question you may not even think here is, does the Wi-Fi backbone that most of our airports have, does it need to be upgraded to 5G? Because if we do go more touchless, if we do go more smartphone or smart device type of intelligence, do we have the bandwidth in both our vendor supplied Wi-Fi and otherwise to cover not only the airport and the employee side of things and the airline side of things, but also maybe a greater use by passengers? So I don't think technology is the answer for everything, but I think it does give us some opportunities for standoff queuing, even if that's waiting in your car a little while before you have to go up and go in.
Stephanie, I think one of the interesting opportunities we have, kind of building on Roddy's comments about the soft targets, is that, if we look at the threats we've all been thinking about for many years with, terrorism and, shootings and other things that have occurred within airports, and we look at some of the measures we're thinking about for public health, and the sneeze guards being a good example of that. We've moved slowly on those because I want to understand, in places we may put those, should we, if that's really going to be a long-term measure, should we be thinking of that as a ballistics and a health solution that brings those things together in a way that we've solved for the interaction with the plexiglass, but we've also eliminated an active shooter threat? And try, yeah, it's going to cost more money, but if it's a forever measure, most of the plexiglass devices I'm seeing installed are, probably going to last 3 or 4 months before there's a problem with them. So I think once we all get a chance to catch our breath, there's some opportunities in how some of these solutions are going to overlap to maybe perhaps solve some of our legacy issues and also prevent the future health issues that we're foreseeing.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I mean, I think the future is around technology to accommodate our industry and air travel. Is we know what investment it takes just to add incremental square footage to try to expand holding areas. And the scale that we're talking about is, it doesn't support the kind of air travel that we were experiencing 2 months ago, to think through all of the challenges we have to make in terms of facility and footprint changes. And really, the future needs to be around technology. And is it that walking person experience where they just walk through the front door, temperature check, and they just keep walking, and it's e-gates and things like that. It's a touchless experience. And by the time they get to their hold room, it's not a congested hold room, because we are all undersized with our hold rooms, and so you have to have that ability to just load as they come. And it's just a completely different way of thinking about our industry. And so I think hopefully there's opportunities, but it's going to be incredibly challenging, I think, to figure out. And we all have to get in there. And I just think technology is probably the future, and we just have to start hammering these things out.
So Ivar, are you proposing almost like a time slot? I think Roddy mentioned this, that people are given. Let's say you've got a 5 p.m. flight. You're given a window that you need to be at the airport, so you can do that seamless walk through the entire airport without having to stand and wait in lines for checking your bag, for going through the TSA, security checkpoint, to when you get to your gate, to hopefully almost immediately walking on to your plane. Is that what your vision is for the future with technology?
With the technology, you think about advanced ordering of food. We can't have people standing now in line to grab and go. And, so it's that automation of your experience through the airport and onto the airplane that I think, that needs to be focused on. But it's incredibly challenging. And that's why I think it needs to be a whole end-to-end kind of travel experience approach, and fully engaged with all of the federal agencies and airlines and everyone else that needs to be part of the solutions. And you just think about revenue from a revenue perspective, and how much we rely on non-airline revenues and food and beverage revenues, and thinking about, the 6-foot separations and taking chairs out. The whole business model changes with these kinds of protections that we're starting to think about and starting to implement. So yeah, we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and that's going to require a lot of money, not just for airports and airlines, but for TSA, for customs. I mean, that's a whole scale change on what our facilities look like right now. So fingers crossed, more money.
If I could just add to that real quickly, I think allowing folks their own, or empowering people to make their own decisions as they're going through the airport. So, selecting those times perhaps to get to, their screening, to order food online via their phone, creating empowerment, which takes away, I think, some of the fear that individuals have. In hospitals, we always talk about this patient and family centric or focus, and so how do we shift that in the airports and make it more of a traveler or passenger focused solution where we give them more options. So we're giving them more control within our facilities, for example, be it touchless, be it via the phone, places to sit. We talked at one point about the holding areas. Maybe it's not a matter of putting plexiglass up in between your screens, but maybe it's just a reconfiguration of seating. Maybe you have grouped areas for families or for groups larger than 4, similar to a restaurant does. A table of, folks, a party of 2 wouldn't sit at a 6 top. So maybe that's something that we consider reconfiguring to spread out people as well, and just giving people more selection.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I think one thing that this is going to impact us, technology seems to sometimes slow us down before we get faster. And as a frequent flyer here at a DFW, I tend to skate in right at an hour before my flight and know what it takes for me to get to the checkpoint and get to the gate right on time. I think that day may be gone for me, if assuming I get to fly again. We've already seen American Airlines push their boarding times back. And if it takes longer to get through the checkpoints, some of the, we dealt with this with the security checkpoints after 911. We may see this even push back a little farther of when you have to arrive to be safely through to be at your gate. So there's a passenger behavior piece that will come of this as well.
Well, that'll make it a challenge for people that are going short distance. They'll then decide, do I want to drive instead if we have to get to the airport 2 hours in advance in order to get the, temperature check and to, have more space between people for social distancing, et cetera. So,
Stephanie, I'm going to build on Aaron's comments a little bit. Maybe it provides also an opportunity for airports to develop what I call an e-commerce platform. So an e-commerce platform, you have it on your phone. So you as a customer, you can book online for your parking. You can schedule when you get to the ticket counter. You can schedule when you're coming through security checkpoint. You can buy your food, when you're going to get in line to board. We can provide that platform, sell those services to the customer, provide an income stream for us, and give the customer what they want is, I want to, if I'm Roddy, to wait to the last minute. I may pay a little bit more for that, but I want to be able to walk right in and do all these things I'm willing to pay a premium for. Maybe there's a financial opportunity here for airports to capitalize on this health perspective our customers have got.
I love that vision.
As a spoke airport, I think we look at, the significant percentage of our market that drives out of market to access one of the larger airports in California for a myriad of reasons. But does this cause people to really look more closely at their hometown airport that may be smaller and maybe an easier point of access into air transportation than getting in the car, driving for whatever length of time, and then going through the process at a larger hub airport to get into the system? I think it will cause folks perhaps to reconsider their options of even which airport they choose as an airport of choice based on how all these factors we've talked about today affect the travel experience.
Mm-hmm. I've got a lot of questions right now popping up. These are to the airports. If you're seeing, and this may be premature to answer, airlines that service your facilities talking about changing their travel schedules so that they're not coming in all so tightly at the same time, within a 45-minute arrive, get everybody off, reload the plane, and get back out. Have you had any type of discussions with airlines about changing their arrival and departure times so we can do social distancing more easily, those types of things?
Not at this point. We've gone from 40, almost 50 departures a day down to, we had one day last week where we had 8 departures that day. So social distancing right now isn't a problem, but it is going to become a problem. So that's an excellent conversation to have with our airline partners.
I agree with you. We've got about 120,000 people flying each day, where typically we have about 2.2 to 2.5 million. So it may be a little bit of time before the airlines start thinking about that, but good point. I have some questions about mats, disinfecting mats. Kyle, do you know anything about this, or RSNH people? Any?
So I could share what we're using here is we're using the UV disinfection for the masks. We run a 5-minute cycle on the outside of the mask and a 5-minute cycle on the inside of the mask. Where it has, with the vendor that we're working with, it can be reprocessed. I think they've tested it up to 80 different times without losing the integrity of the mask. Since you're not physically cleaning or getting the mask wet, it's not having an impact. What we're finding is that after multiple wears, some of our groups are reporting that just from the particulate that comes out of our breath is clogging up the N95 masks. Our goal from a recycle perspective is to be able to get 3 to 5 shifts out of the mask. And really, that's just to help us combat the shortage of PPE that currently exists in the country. Similar to, as Kelly shared about the fogging that they're doing in the airports, there's also a fogging type machine that's been used to do disinfection of masks within other healthcare facilities. It uses a peroxide base to be able to clean the masks. I actually believe, Michael, they're doing that at Duke University Hospital for their mask cleaning.
Stephanie, I know that if you were, I'm not sure if you're talking about masks or mats, but if you were talking about mats, I know there are some advertisements for germicidal mats, which sometimes are combined with anti-fatigue type of mats that people stand on. But I think, like all products that have these claims these days, we're going to have to really look at them and make sure they do what you're going to do. Yeah.
Where would those go if we were installing mats? Would that be for the airport employees? Would it be for the passengers?
I've seen some conversation. I don't know if this is what's intended, but I've seen some conversation, people saying, what if we put them in places where we have queue lines so that the passengers or the people staying in the queues are at least standing on something that's anti-germicidal. I just don't know if that's, is that a big help or not? I don't know.
Only precautionary I would give is just make sure they're ADA compliant. A lot of those, just with a person with a cane or a walker, can be a tripping hazard. The other thing I would just add about cleaning is I would take a look at the products you're using for cleaning, the wet time, or how long the surface has got to stay wet for the disinfection and the work is highly variable from cleaning product to cleaning product. I'd encourage you to look at that both in your house and what you're using commercially. There's been a migration in healthcare more to the peroxide cleaners because their wet times are significantly less. They're about 1 minute, where some of the quaternary cleaners and other disinfectants are up to 4 minutes.
And following on that, I would, to Roddy's point, I think queue line's a good place to put them. We see what we deem as sticky mats in the biotech arena and the pharma arena to kind of clean the bottom of shoes from actual particulate. There are antimicrobial mats that are used in order to clean or to disinfect, as one person is standing there. To Kyle's point about cleaners, you also need to check the type of surfaces that you're putting these cleaners on, especially once you're going to hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide has a tendency to break down certain rubbers and certain plastics. So you need to make sure that your finishes are capable of actually accepting and holding these hardier chemicals and hardier cleaners for what they are intended to do.
Okay. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions before we need to wrap up. I have one for the airports about what are your thoughts about, like Kyle mentioned, limiting who comes into the facilities? You know, are there any thoughts about getting rid of the meter and greeter policy? Or at some airports, you can go to the gate. You can get a gate pass. At least in the near term, are you thinking about any changes like that to reduce who goes back into your facilities?
We've been
already,
go ahead, Kelly.
we've already shut down all but one primary entry to the front of the terminal building, and people that are meters and greeters right now aren't allowed into the building. We certainly have deliveries and construction people. We've got other projects going on. But looking down the road, we are trying to review how we make that work and how we make that space for them safe so that we can keep them the appropriate distance apart. So that's part of an ongoing architectural project we have in the works right now. And the timing couldn't have been better for us because we can build these things into that whole process for construction.
We were discussing that as well, and one of the conclusions we came to, not that we get a tremendous amount of that, but that if we create the barrier at the door of, hey, you know, unless you're a ticketed passenger, you're not allowed in this facility, well, then we anticipate whatever portion of those people would still want to do that, they're going to gather on the sidewalk in front of the building. So, you know, is it you can't get out of your car unless you're traveling? And where do you draw the line if you keep moving it back? At this point, we've not made any final decisions on that, but it seems that, you know, while you may keep them out of some portion of the building, you're going to have people that would inherently gather at that limit to either say goodbye or to meet someone who's arriving. It's where do you want it at that point? The other thing, in looking at one of the questions that was up there a moment ago, I think that's really important to think about in all this from a customer experience standpoint is, you know, we've talked a lot today about some very detailed levels of cleaning and sanitation that at the end of the day are, unless the customers smell the bleach, they're probably not going to see a difference than if we swept the floor or we sterilized it with UV. Because, you know, whatever we're doing, a lot of this is going to happen during hours when they're maybe not there, or the level of sanitation doesn't appear much differently than the cleanliness. But when we think about those other measures like nice music, positive messaging, a lot of the soft things that we've all been doing for a long time to make the journey wonderful and pleasant and maybe even exciting, I think we're going to need some extra emphasis on all that, because the level of stress and anxiety is going to be probably higher than it's ever been. And yeah, we're all going to be working really hard to keep our facilities clean, but you know, what are the other things we can add into this mix to help create some level of enjoyment in the journey that can reduce that stress? And maybe if the place isn't perfectly clean, they'll still be satisfied.
Kevin, that's the great thought. I was going to end with that question because that was a question. If anyone wants to, you know, chime in with a last minute thought about what you're doing to give a positive experience, happy for some last words. I'm sure everybody is trying to give a positive experience. We need people back in the airports and flying and feeling safe in our facilities.
Well, one of the things, Stephanie, that we were talking about with several people that we've been speaking with is just show cleaning, show that cleaning's happening. Because if I arrive in the airport 5 minutes after your major cleaning was done, fogging, scraping, you know, whatever you're doing, I have no idea, to Kevin's point, of what was just done. And so it may be clean, but the fact that you're seeing people clean it is satisfying in some regards. And maybe, as somebody said about, you know, adjusting your banks of flights, if your hold rooms get clean between every flight so you don't have so many flights overlapping, maybe that helps people feel better about sitting there and standing there. It can be low risk, it can be, you know, not a lot of high tech, but the fact that somebody's cleaning, I think, will make people feel a lot better.
Yeah, I think that's right too. And, you know, we've compressed our operation and reduced our footprint. And so now we've been able to focus the cleaning in those areas where the passengers are. And from the social comments that's been well received. I was just looking at our latest ASQ scores, and I am back to the point about an environment, creating an environment. And I see that, our newer terminals with a focus on that passenger experience perform really well in ASQ. And so it is still that attention to detail and attention to the environment that you create to try to de-stress the environment. And it's also that focus of all of the people that work there and have reinforced the need for them to also be accommodating and gracious to the passengers as well, recognizing that we've increased the stress of travel now through our facilities, and we all need to put on that kind of face of, we're here to serve the passenger. How do we all create a reduced stress experience with the interactions that we have? There's so many interactions, TSA, ticket counters, check-in, everything we do here, food and beverage. So it requires airports to really redouble their efforts and enforce the values of an airport, the culture that says the passenger is our primary focus, and have the passenger treated in that manner.
Ivar, you've had the last word, and I think that was a good last word. So it's 5 o'clock, unfortunately. This concludes our Readying Your Airport for a Changed World webinar. I'd like to thank all the panelists for your time and the great advice that you've provided the participants, as well as RSNH for sponsoring the webinar. And obviously the participants with their host of questions all over the place that hopefully we got to some of. For those that we did not answer, we will try to get back to you on those. And in the coming days, we will send all the registrants a recording of the webinar. So thank you again, everyone, for participating. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day with whatever time zone you're in. So thank you.